Good day. This is my presentation on human experimentation of pharmaceutical use. We'll be doing two cases today. One is case one, which will be Allison's instant uncertainty, and case two, which will be the 23-year-long Holmesburg prison experiment. We'll start with case one. The basis of case one: Allison is a 19-year-old female who is faced with the flu vaccine shortage. She has a moderately severe asthma, and catching the flu would prove to be fatal. The vaccine would greatly reduce her risk of catching the flu and also the dangers if she did catch it. In this case, there was a shortage due to the flu vaccine not being the flu vaccine production not being mandated by any agency or entity, which leaves its production to at-will operations by various companies. This year there was a shortage of a vaccine due to one of the companies having a bacterial infection in their batch, which makes it unsafe to put out. The flu vaccine is also a non-reusable vaccine. Once the year is ended, once the period is ended, you have to make a new batch altogether. This makes the vaccine both limited in production capacity, like shelf life, and expensive. This limited vaccine supply meant only specific people could get it within this specific time, and which had an effect on the clinics which distributed it. And there are different ways which the clinics chose to distribute the vaccine. There's different methods. There's the selective method using medical necessity criteria. This is based on the medical necessity criteria is based upon a specific health conditions, which is usually done with the insurance approved and has very specific restrictions. We tend to avoid doing this due to the hassles of always having to deal with the insurance companies, which always gives a bad a bad feeling for most people when to deal with that. There's a selective method. There's a random method in a lottery system. You like a lottery, you have to give out cards and then you get drawn on a random. This is a bit too random for a vaccine distribution, especially in a limited supply and when you have vulnerable people. There is also the other random method, which is the first come, first served basis, where whoever gets the clinic first would get their shot. Well, they should get their shot. That's who arrives earliest and who gets there on who the people that will be there will have that shot until the supply runs out. This is the method that the clinic actually is going to choose to use. They did this method with a bit of a twist. They twisted the method based on vulnerability, based on age and exposure. So the vulnerability in this case would have been the people who are around babies and toddlers and their caretakers, pregnant women, people in a certain age range, people who have illnesses like asthma, chest conditions, things that would make it hard to breathe that would not affect a regular healthy individual. There's also a criteria for old age, as older people are more prone to getting colds, chest infections, and flus, and their immune systems are weaker. It means they will have a much harder time with it than we do. Alison was within the range of these people, and she went to this clinic. This clinic had the first come, first served system. And as we go through the case, she recounts her experience of uncertainty whether she would get it due to being with number 63 in line, and the supply was uncertain. She also saw a young man being rejected as he got there earlier before her. He was rejected from being vaccinated because he was deemed not high risk and not vulnerable, even though he was willing to pay. So he comes to interaction with an old man in the same position, being vulnerable but uncertain in his position for receiving. And this is the choice of the clinic and the nurses. And we move on. These are the biomedical ethical concerns I've identified in this case. One is the autonomy. In the sake of the limited supply, have the nurses violated the autonomy of those gathered by being forced to pick and choose and already utilizing the first come first served system, but then the modification of it based on the medical criteria. And then for beneficence and justice. Has there been the overall good done by rejecting some who have gathered early to get the vaccine, even if they are willing to pay? I've seen with the young man in the case who was witnessed by Allison, he was willing to pay, but he was rejected for not being vulnerable enough, which kind of it still borders on the autonomy. It's bordering his autonomy to be vaccinated. It might be doing him non-beneficence or maleficence by rejecting him from getting and being vaccinated and having a more safe measure. And in doing that, are they doing him an injustice by leaving him unvaccinated? There's also the injustice in the first come first served system. As the old man with Allison, he detailed to her the story of his daughter and her children, who were unable to come to the come first served clinic due to the mother's, his daughter's busy schedule and the children having school and stuff, and the uncertainty of it, they were just taking them out and might not seem worth it. And then should the U.S. government ensure that the vaccine production and distribution is a guaranteed right, as for currently it seems to be a soft right, which means they won't stop you from getting it, but they will not guarantee that you do have it, which may be an issue. And my thoughts on that are, my thoughts on that are, move on to, these are my thoughts and suggestions on the biomedical ethical concerns that I highlighted. Our autonomy is defined as our ability to make our own decisions in the case of vaccines, the choice to be or not to be vaccinated, which is up to us, obviously. In this case, the nurses are violating their autonomy, as they are picking and choosing who gets to be vaccinated, although this is based in the case that there is a limited supply. Then you have to see if they're violating the autonomy, if they're trying to do the overall good by ensuring the most vulnerable people get this vaccine, which might be seen as maleficent to those who are not among the vulnerable, as it leads them to fend on their own immune system to deal with the flu and also not spread it to others. And it's also impossible to know if all the people that were rejected from getting it are truly not vulnerable or just less vulnerable than those who are the vulnerable categories. And if they may also suffer from not getting the vaccine, which makes them more, which would be like a negative depending on the situation. And I think that the US government should mandate the necessary production of the flu vaccine given the potential harm to the wide population. But this would be difficult as the US has a transactional nature on healthcare compared to a country like Barbados, which has a more not relaxed, but a more free and infinitely more free healthcare system on vaccinations and treatments and illnesses and stuff like that. Now we move on to case two. Case two. The basis of case two. For 23 years, from 1951 to 1979, the inmates of the Holmesburg prison in Philadelphia were subjected to unethical experiments at the hands of Dr. Klingman. He is a dermatologist from the University of Pennsylvania. These experiments yielded successful products such as Retin A, which is an anti-aging product. He's a dermatologist. All his products were testing skin care and perfumes different reactions to the body inject based of the skin based on different products. That was his field. These experiments were given under misinformation and with improper compensation. The prisoners were not told what they were being injected with most of the time. They were simply lied to and given a shot and left and were studied to see the results. The inmates were also paid up to like $1 for their troubles, the troubles of being experimented on, the effects, psychological, physical, bodily harm, all of that. Well, people like Dr. Klingman reaped the many benefits, the dollars, the big dough from these experiments, whilst leaving the inmates to just be left at the wayside. The case also details the long-lasting psychological effects on both the inmates and their families. The inmates also the cases the case showed testimony from Herbert Rice, who is a survivor of the experimentation. He had night terrors, hallucinations, and all that. There's also been testimony from the daughter of another inmate who said the change in her father's demeanor was extreme, from a very jovial, playful man to a very restrictive, very distracted man. And the effects that were on Herbert Rice were also across thousands of inmates within the prison. With this, all of them did not make it, couldn't get the chance to record their experience with the whole book and the national, not national outrage, but the exposure of these things. The inmates also suffered dehumanization at the hands of Dr. Klingman, as he saw them as a commodity. And as we know, with Philadelphia, at this time, that based on the year and history and the way he viewed the people, there were likely a high rate of colored black people, Italy, and we know Dr. Klingman to be a very white man. Of course, during the time, these experimentations on inmates was very common in America. Despite American doctors being involved in the Nuremberg trials, they often disregard these trials as they thought, no, that doesn't apply to us because we're not German. We're American. We can do these things and get away. But Klingman's were exceptional due to the length of his operations, the scopes of his operation, given the mass scale of the prison, and the contractors involved, as he had many contracts with Johnson and Johnson, we know with their talcum powder and how that went, the US military system, testing the products on demand without their consent and not or knowledge, and different contractors for different products. We now move on to the biomedical ethical concerns. The biomedical ethical concerns I found from this case: how could this human experimentation have been conducted more ethically, if it could have been conducted more ethically at all? Can and has proper justice been administered for the violation of the men's autonomy, and what that would begin to look like? And then, are the products created from the dehumanization, experimentation, and the suffering of fellow inmates worthwhile in their usage by the general public, us, and the financial benefit that the companies will have gotten on the backs of these inmates and the suffering of both the inmates, their families, and thousands of other people who would have witnessed these things. These are my thoughts and solutions on the case. The experimentation could have been made slightly more ethical by the appropriate application of informed consent, which would involve telling the inmates what they were being injected with, what the experiment would have entailed, the effects they would have suffered, and in the long term effects that might come from the experiment. Basically letting them know what they're getting themselves into. There would also been proper compensation, which would have been more than a dollar. A dollar, the value of a dollar today is not the value of a dollar in 1951 to 1974. But it still was not enough for the effects that they suffered on this long-term, lifelong scale. The issue also arises due to being incarcerated, the ability to truly consent to specific procedures can be seen as non-existent, which makes the involvement of the inmates a harder task to make fully ethical, meaning this would probably always be somewhat unethical. That's why in recent years, since the exposure of the experimentation on prisoners in America, they've been working to strip the kind of invasive experiments that would require a stronger case of consent. Of course, there have been those who are trying to reintroduce experimenting on prisoners by saying it would give a wider range of demographics, which might seem a little bit racist if you read into that statement, considering experiments are usually done on white middle-aged men and wanting to involve prisoners, they claim to give a wider demographic, the demographic being, reading through the context, black men, which is a little racist in America. And moving on to the justice and moving on to if justice was done. In articles, Herbert Wright stated that although he would appreciate more compensation, nothing could be truly done to appease his pain and suffering. And from this, we can assume that there was no, we know there was no proper justice done, as there have been many lawsuits filed against Klingman, which were unsuccessful. Against Klingman, the company, most of them were unsuccessful in terms of monetary compensation. There have been social compensations. There have been reforms to discontinue these types of experiments, as stated before. There have also been formal apologies issued by both the prison, university, and the state. The university has also denounced some or most of Klingman's acknowledgements, pledges, and appraisals and appreciations, have redistributed those funds to other things for relief of those of the experiment, but I still not think this is full justice. And then, do the products made from these experiments, are they, with knowing what they came from, change the usage pattern of these experiments? I do not think it would. I don't think so. Most people do not care about the background. I cannot say most people. Fair most people do not care about the background of the things they use, which and showing them that it came from human experimentation, and then on the demographic that was experimented might not change much in their mind. On the other hand, you have to ask, I will have to ask myself, if boycotting these products will make the suffering men endured worth less, as it does give scientific results at the cost of people's lives and the quality of life, and at the risk of the quality of life, and it has yielded success in these products. So these are my thoughts on the case. And this is the end of the video. Have a good day, everyone.